Ukraine's Zelensky just did what many thought unthinkable, and Russia's Putin would certainly be proud of. Zelensky has signed a law that effectively dismantles Ukraine's most powerful anti-corruption agencies, the very institutions created after the Maidan revolution to keep politicians in check. And he's done it in the dead of night, in a parliamentary vote so rushed through so fast, most MPs didn't even see it coming. Critics are calling it Ukraine's most brazen slide towards authoritarianism since the fall of Yanukovych. And that comparison? Well, it's not just coming from the usual suspects in Moscow, it's coming from Zelensky's own and closest allies. So in this video, I wanted to unpack what this move really means for Ukraine's political system right now, why it's such a dangerous moment for the country's democratic trajectory, and what could happen next, both at home and with the country's increasingly uneasy Western backers.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going? Welcome to the channel, where we try to be objective and balanced, which includes calling out and identifying grievous errors, no matter how uncomfortable they may be, in this case regarding the political firestorm now occurring in Kyiv, Ukraine. From anti-corruption raids to midnight legislation, from EU outrage to domestic protest, this story is developing very quickly, but demonstrates, well, the importance of Ukraine's democracy and future, and more importantly, or further afield, the relationship of Western support in funding an ally, or potentially enabling something far murkier. Now, a key point to be emphasized early on is the distinction between the fact Ukrainians can even protest at all. It speaks volumes about how the country has progressed relative to Putin's Russia in the 30 years since the breakup of the Soviet Union. However, it does also demonstrate that these protests wouldn't have to happen at all if it weren't for the very, very concerning and unilateral decisions being made by President Zelensky. When civil society, as we've seen in places like Georgia, is forced to take to the streets to protect institutions built around mass resistance movements, it's not a sign of resilience alone. It's a sign that something is going very wrong and could get even worse. So developments now all began because of a vote, a rushed, early morning committee session on July 22nd, where barely, anyone actually showed up. By the afternoon, Bill 12414 had passed. 263 MPs had voted for it. Just 13 voted no. What did it do? Well, it put Ukraine's two main independent anti-corruption bodies, the NABU and SAPO, under the direct control of the Prosecutor General, which is a presidential appointee. There was a politicalization, effectively. In wartime, yes, but there was zero public input and minimal debate. Zelensky's signature came that very same night, and by the end of the 22nd of July, there were mass criticisms across X and other social media from even some of Zelensky's biggest supporters. Despite public warnings from the European Union, G7 ambassadors, and civil society leaders, indeed, he signed it. This timing wasn't coincidental either. Just days earlier, Ukraine's domestic security service had launched 70 raids, yes, 70, on senior investigations from the NABU and SAPO. No court warrants, no due process. They even raided the homes of Vitaly Shabunin, one of Ukraine's most prominent anti-corruption activists, and his family. The official line, well, that the government claims these figures were corrupt and possibly linked to Russian intelligence. And of course, we can't rule that out. It is Putin's Kremlin and the FSB that we've seen active in Romania, Moldova, Georgia. But critics say it looks more like a retaliation, especially since NABU had opened investigations into officials close to Zelensky's presidential office. And that's when, late yesterday afternoon, the protests began. One wrote on X, "Grab your cardboard, write what you feel. Let's remind this government we are not going back to the Yanukovych era." But by that evening, demonstrators were out in Kiev even more than expected, furious at what they saw as the gutting of Maidan's legacy. This wasn't a foreign plot. It wasn't Russian meddling for many. This was Ukrainians protesting their own government, demanding accountability from the very leaders they have elected. And yet this protest is now being twisted, of naturally weaponized by the United States and what you could argue is the lunatic fringe of American politics. Everyone's favorite Marjorie Taylor Greene and Charlie Kirk already gloating, see Ukraine, fully corrupt. But here's the thing they'll never admit. In a corrupt country, this protest would never be allowed. And the fact that it is occurring demonstrates that there is greater opportunity for freedom of expression relative to Putin's Russia. The very fact that people are standing up, shouting shame in Parliament and risking arrest to defend this institutional framework, well, that's what democracy, however fragile or infant it may be, does still represent. Now, if you've made it this far, you're clearly passionate about Ukraine or democracy and international relations. Well, that's what I aim to cover on this channel. So do consider liking the button and subscribing, or most importantly, sharing your thoughts in a comment. I do read them all, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this problematic development. Now, unfortunately, the crackdown didn't stop the raids or legal restructuring. This is part of a longer pattern. Zelensky's team have already blocked independent appointments to other key and anti-corruption roles earlier this year, such as the Bureau of Economic Security. Instead, they have installed loyalists. And now, all formerly independent economic crime agencies are under the control of Ruslan Kravchenko, a man who failed to qualify as a regular prosecutor due to past corruption allegations. But he was promoted anyway. Civil society leaders like Daria Kalenyuk and Olga Rudenko, once vocal defenders of Zelensky, are really sounding alarmist. Rudenko writing, "This isn't what our people have been fighting and dying for." And international figures are already piling on. Estonia's former president called the move, quote, a complete disaster. The EU is warning it could derail Ukraine's entire, not partial, but entire EU ascension path, even potentially triggering sanctions. And it's also been reported that French President Emmanuel Macron and European Council President Antonio Costa have urged Zelensky quickly to reconsider. And Valdis Dombrovskis, the EU's commissioner overseeing much of the financial aid to Ukraine, has made it clear, quote, our current financial assistance is conditionary on transparency, judicial reforms, and democratic governance. Indeed, while the United States turns away, perhaps this is one of the rare illustrations of the EU putting its foot down in support of soft power, but playing it hardball. Now, Zelensky's team may have thought the West's would look away, especially now that Trump's allies are regaining that traction and Ukraine fatigue has been settling in, but could be offset by the fact that the US is willing to support it again. But that gamble may well and seems to be already backfiring. The G7 has issued today a formal statement expressing serious concerns and warning that they are seeking direct talks with Kyiv to make sense. Behind the scenes, moreover, Ukrainian officials are scrambling to do damage control. According to some sources, top officials, including Ukrainian Taras Kachka, have launched flurries of messages to Western capitals and diplomats to justify this move and deny that there is an attempted or seeming power grab. Indeed, Zelensky himself has told EU Commissioner Marta Koz that the new law was not intended and is not aimed at undermining independence, and has insisted that there will be no, quote, compromise on anti-corruption. In various follow-up meetings already, he's emphasized that they do share a common enemy, the Russian occupiers. But Western diplomats aren't reassured. As others have put it, it's like herding cats in a pen. It doesn't really help if 26 cats are already wary of moving forward. Ukraine's already fragile path to EU accession, blocked by Hungary's pro-Russian stance, just became that little bit harder to defend. And, well, while it's early days, this certainly could mean the snowball is rolling in the wrong direction. Of course, none of this means that Ukraine isn't worth supporting. But if you're watching from the outside, here's the bottom line. For many, Ukraine's greatest strength isn't just its military, it's the people who support it and their resilience and unwillingness to give up. And when those people start risking arrest to protest their own president, they're not showing any weakness. They're showing the one thing that sets Ukraine apart from Putin and his control over the Russian people. They believe that they deserve better. They believe in independent thinking and freedom of expression. Zelensky has time to still prove he's listening, though. And, well, this is certainly a misstep. Whether he chooses to continue stepping forward or take steps back remains to be seen. So if you want more sharp, honest takes on Russia, Ukraine, and everything in between, then do consider joining the channel, because democracy isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for, and something that we certainly aim to emphasize here. If you don't know me, my name is Pyotr Kurzin, a geopolitical strategist and commentator and host of the Global Gambit, where I speak with world leaders, journalists, and experts about international relations, grand strategy, and economics. I hold a master's degree in those very issues from Johns Hopkins SAIS, and I've also worked at organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations. But also, as someone with both Russian and English roots, I, try to bring a unique perspective of someone who's been brought up predominantly in the West, but has a lot of strong Slavic, particularly Russian influences, offering perspectives on how power, ideology, and identity collide in today's geopolitical landscape. If you want more grounded, critical analysis, then do consider subscribing and dropping your comments below. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.